Welcome back to Squeezing the Plums. My name is Singh, and this episode is a bit of a different episode. It's one that I thought I would do because I've hit now the 6 month mark after having a hair transplant, and on my social media, there's been a few boys that have reached out, even a few partners, on what the hair transplant journey was like and why I did it. So I thought I'd do this podcast to really break down succinctly why I decided to get it, and then more importantly, what were the steps that I had to take to get it done, and then what was like the post procedure plan after that. And then, I'm 6 months down the track now. This is a video podcast, so if you're looking at me, you'll be able to tell that the hair, it's grown back a bit. It's good. 6 months in, it's bloody good, and I'm wrapped with it. So, I'll run through all the things that happened, and maybe some of the reasons that you should look at it, or maybe you shouldn't look at it, and then we'll go from there. But this started like the male pattern balding started for me around 24, 25 years of age. Started sprinkling a few grays. I had a little sister at that age that would be like, standing on top of me at the dinner table whilst I'm sitting down and sort of parting my hair. And at that stage, I never really saw any major thinning. I just thought everyone was sort of having a bit of a crack at me. Just it's an easy thing for them to do. But as I got older and older, I started to go, shit, it's a bit different. It's a bit harder to style my hair. And then before you knew it, the downlight in the bathroom would just magically shine on like the bald spot of my head. And I'd be like, oh, this is not good. And it got to a stage where I went to the doctors and they were like, yep, you can take medication for this. So I went on Propecia, which is finasteride, and also on minoxidil, which I used from a commercial point of view as Regain. And I would use that time and time again. And that actually helped quite a lot. But I didn't like the idea of having to do that for the rest of my life. And also, I really found for me, and, I don't know about other guys, but like taking the medication, taking the finasteride was really bad, really affected my libido. And so I stopped taking that once I found that out. And one of the things that I did when I went to different hair doctors and consultations was I found out that the dose that they were recommending, which was like a milligram a day, was really like overprescribed. And so after a little bit of work, I did find that if you did want to take finasteride or Propecia, that 3 times a week at somewhere around zero point 0.5 to 0.75 milligrams is a more than enough amount to get sort of an effect on your hair loss. And so the medication would help with prevention of hair loss because it would affect the amount of testosterone your scalp would produce. And then the minoxidil would, or the Regain, would help with the hair growth. And so you needed both of them to work in conjunction with another to create an effect. Anyways, it got to sort of COVID, and I actually had a consultation. And at the time, there were two different types of procedures. There was one where they shave your head fully off, and then they take your hair follicles from your donor site, pop them back in your head. And then there was another one which I was inquiring about. It was cheaper at the time, and they would take like an incision off the back of your scalp that then there'd be a scar left over on the back of your head, and as long as you didn't shave, you wouldn't see it. And then they would pop that into your scalp as well. Now, I'm glad I never did that because, fast forward 6 months ago, I did the shaving my head fully off and then using the donor site as a way to be able to get as many follicles as I needed. And I found that, going about it that way, it allowed the surgeon, as he put it, to see exactly where he wanted to put the hair follicles. So for me, that was something where if you're looking between the two, and I don't know if those two are even an option now, but I think the one that I did was called F. And so as I started to consult and learn about these things, it got to a stage where it was just affordability was an issue. And so as most guys do, we start to look at, well, fuck, why don't we go to Turkey or like go somewhere else? And you start speaking to doctors over there and they talk about all the different technology they got and all the rest of the things. But it was interesting. Recently, a mate of mine reached out to me. He said, why don't we do it here in Melbourne? There are nurses that actually do it and the doctors oversee them, and it's half the price. Now, for me, I thought that was a bloody good option. So I did a consultation, and me and him went in together, and they said, look, Steve, for you and where your male pattern balding is, you could probably do with about 8 to 8,500 extra hairs to cover up the thinning of your hair and where the balding was happening. Now, if you're one that's done a little bit of research, effectively you can have anywhere between sort of like 2 to 4 or 1 to 4 hairs per follicle. So that means that, approximately 8,500 hairs is about 4,000 grafts. And I was like, all right, this sounds pretty good to me. So after my initial consultation, I decided to go, yep, let's go ahead, let's do it. It was in summer, and the risk behind that was you're actually not allowed to get any sunlight or exposure to sun for a month post-op. I know there's different doctors that provide different advice, but this is what was told to me. And you couldn't wear a cap as well for at least 2 to 3 weeks. So I was like, all right, well, peak summer, I'll have to stay indoors, but better now so that by the time the end of the year comes around, it's a full head of hair, which, it's looking pretty good at 6 months as we speak. And the procedure goes like this. Here's the steps, and here's the things that you might want to think about and look at if you're going into something like this. For me, because I did it with nurses, it took 2 days. So on the first day, we did half the procedure. On the second day, we did the other half. And it started off with fully shaving the head, which is an experience on its own. And then you have to lie down on your stomach, and they start to extract hair from your donor site. Now, the donor site for most blokes is the area of the scalp where the testosterone does not affect the follicles, which is on the back of the head. So mostly around like the back of the head and the side of the head is where your follicles are the strongest. And they extract those follicles. They put them on a Petri dish. They figure out which follicles have 1 hair, 2 hair, 3 hair, 4 hair. And then they start to figure out where they put the densest follicles and where they put the lightest follicles. And based off me, they would put the lightest follicles at the front and the densest follicles on the center of on the head. So that procedure, that just the extraction phase took 3 to 4 hours. And lying on your tummy, if you ever get it done, you should definitely have some Vicks vape drops because your nose get blocked as hell. And if you've got a sore lower back, make sure that gets sorted before you lie down on your stomach for 4 hours, because that was actually, pretty uncomfortable. Then you flip over and they will then grab the hairs that they got in the Petri dish, and they have this like little, I guess, sort of pen-like thing where they sort of jab it into your scalp, and that can literally put the follicle, the hair back in straight away. So that's how they did it for me. There are a couple of other ways that they can do it, but the one thing that I would consider is if you have a choice of the local anesthetic you get. I got one where they did like multiple injections all the time in my scalp into all the different areas and sites. That really hurt. That was like super sensitive. Whereas some of the doctors, they do like almost like a ring block. And I heard that was a lot better way to go about it. So if your doctor's got both options, I would definitely do that option. Now, at the end of day one, they had effectively extracted 2,000 grafts, popped it back in onto the off the donor side onto the side that needed all the hair, and then they bandage you up and you go home. And when you go home, if you're doing a 2-day procedure like me, or even if you're doing a 1-day procedure, you have to make sure you can't sleep on the back of your head. So in other words, I use like an aeroplane pillow to jar my neck away from the bed frame so that my head wouldn't lie against the pillow. And that you need to do for a minimum of 2 weeks. So that can be pretty uncomfortable, but once that's over, you can get a good night's rest, no problems. And then you go back in on the second day. And for most people, if they get it done by a doctor rather than nurses, they'll probably get it done all in 1 day. And they repeated the procedure. And after all of that was done, for me, they actually ended up doing about 9,000 hairs. The cost of all of this, if you were to have done it just with the doctor, would have been around 20 to 25,000, which is a pretty penny. I ended up paying somewhere around 8.5 because I was quoted for, 4,000 grafts, 8,000 hairs, and just because of they wanting to make it look better. They ended up doing more for me, which is awesome. And I think it always is a good lesson to be nice to whoever your consultant is and to whoever your nurse and your doctor is, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are going to spend extra time looking after your hair. So if you're an asshole, they'll probably just leave it. Whereas if you're good, they might extract a few more hairs, and promise you it is worth every bit to make sure that you get the best possible coverage ever. Now, what happens after you get this done? What does the next month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, and 12 months look like if you're interested in getting a hair transplant? So for me, the biggest thing that I didn't account for, because I wanted to return back to work as quick as possible, was the swelling that came because of all the anesthetic that they put in the head, and also because I got home and I had a truckload of cleaning to do. All of that swelling built up massively in my forehead, and I've got a video on Instagram you can have a look at. And then it drained down my face into my eyes, cheeks. I looked like an Indian chipmunk. It was hilarious. And at about the 4-day mark and the 5-day mark, I was puffy as hell. It was hectic. It was hectic. It was a lot of swelling. Like, good old ethnic mums, they want to come over, see how you are. I refuse for my mum to see me. I'm like, hell no. It was pretty interesting. But the boys, my housemate and the other fellas, they had a good laugh. So that was good for them, I guess. And then at the week mark, most of my swelling had gone down. Now, for my mate that I did the procedure with, he had hardly any swelling. He healed perfectly. It was unbelievable. He was Wolverine. Me, I had a different experience. So every single person is different. But once that was done, what I found, especially in week 1, was the itchiness that you got on your scalp started to really bug me. And we got given a saline spray that we had to regularly use on the top of our head. One, because we couldn't wet the head, but two, we could use saline to effectively keep that wound site dampened a little bit, so that the scabbing that would happen on the top of the scalp would happen in a fashion that would allow it to shed in a couple of weeks from the procedure. One night, I do remember this, and it's a bit embarrassing, but I had saline spray in the bathroom, so every time I go to the bathroom, I'd spray. But I unfortunately got that mixed up with SARD, which is what you use on your clothes. And at about day 3, I sprayed a whole bunch of SARD on top of my head, and that was the worst 2 a.m. retard moment I have ever done in my entire life. I was freaking out that I've just fucked up everything, $8,500 down the drain. So nothing happened. It was me overreacting. But if you're ever going to go through this phase, make sure you don't mix up your saline spray in the middle of the night with any other sprays that you've got, i.e. SARD, Dettol, whatever. From there, after the week, you still get that itchiness that remains, but your head starts to scab up. And at about 2 to 3 weeks, what you'll start to find is those scabs will start to fall off. And that's when, you go from looking like, oh, wow, you've got scabs all over your head to it's starting to look a little bit more normal now. The way I describe the look is almost like you got hair tattooing. And depending on who's done it, they'll use different inks or dyes throughout the procedure so that, the way the scabbing might look would be different. But after that, it's just about making sure you're out of sunlight, which is what I was doing. And there's absolutely no training, no lifting for 4 weeks, which, to be honest, that was probably out of everything, that was the hardest thing to manage. And that's simply because you can't increase the incompartmental pressure of your scalp or your head. And also you're not allowed to technically sweat through your scalp, and you don't want to increase your risk of infection. So at the 4-week marks, you can go ham, you can go nuts, you can go for it. But for the first 3 to 4 weeks, you have to be so disciplined. And if you want to get exercise, it's pitch black. And you are not elevating your heart rate or doing anything to create a sweat. At about the month to 6 weeks, we start to undergo what's called the ugly duckling phase. And so what that is you start having your hairs grow out of the follicles. But at about 6 weeks, we have something called shock loss. And shock loss happens because you've just had a procedure on your scalp. And so the hairs fall out of the follicles, and then the new hairs start to regenerate from there. So at 6 weeks, you almost look like, oh, this is good. And then hair start to fall out sporadically. And that's probably the hardest bit to manage. Between 6 weeks to 3 months is when you really go, is this thing going to work for me? Then after speaking to a few boys that had it done, including myself, 3 to 4 months is when you start to see the hairs grow out, thicken up, and get a little bit of shape. And then month 4 to 6 is, well, this is month 6 right now. It doesn't look like I've had a procedure at all. And I think had I had known that, like everyone told me 12 to 18 months, but I'll just tilt my head down so you can see on the camera. It's pretty good. It's tons thicker than it was before I got it done. So that's a net positive, I guess. Now, over this period of time, they did ask for me to take finasteride to really make sure that I was reducing any risk of these hairs falling out. But once again, the finasteride really affected me. So I used it for the first few months. I've gone off it now, and to be honest, the hair looks fine. They did also encourage potentially PRP. Now, I did PRP as a treatment alongside the minoxidil and alongside the Propecia or finasteride. But for me, it didn't really do too much. Apparently, some people get results from it. Honestly, for the pain and the price, it's not worth it after having done a few sessions of that previously. So for me, the PRP was really overrated. There is a new finasteride drug called durasteride. That's also something that you could look at too. But after having done the hair procedure, honestly, it's worth every penny. And for me, especially, like I started to get more and more self-conscious about, how I would go out, what kind of products I would use. Even in modeling shoots, the last shoot I did before I got my hair transplant, they had to spray my hair with all this black stuff so that like when the light would flash off the camera, you couldn't see through the thinness of my hair, which was pretty embarrassing to see on camera. So yeah, for me, I think it was awesome to get it done. And for my mates that are bald, I've had a couple of mates that, their biggest regret is not actually doing it or waiting too late. I guess the final thing about it all is, how long do you wait? I would say honestly that you want to make sure you've got enough of a donor site, a strong donor site that is, to be able to utilize. And if you go super bald, like you might need to do multiple procedures over, a certain period of time to be able to make up the difference for the amount of exposed scalp that you've got. So that is definitely a consideration to take. In terms of wrapping up this podcast, I hope I've sort of got through everything in terms of what are the sort of circumstances and situations that have occurred as a result of doing the hair transplant. I've got this up on my Instagram. I'm not the best person at CapCut and cutting all my videos up, but I have got my initial first video, and I'll do another one to show progress pics. But if you've got questions, reach out to me. I pay for my procedure. I'm not sponsored by anyone or anything, but I do think that's really interesting how many men are afraid to talk about getting their hair done. And now having done it, and actually saying that I've done it, to be honest, a lot of boys reach out and they go, yeah, this is normal. This is fine to do. So if you're someone on the edge and money isn't an issue, I definitely wouldn't be shy in getting it done, but definitely don't do it in peak summer. Do it towards the end of summer would be my recommendation, or in the early stages of winter, just so that you're not sweating and that you can go outside. Anyways, I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. If you have, just remember, please, pressing the follow button or the subscribe button, depending on where you're listening to it, really helps this channel grow, and I'd appreciate it a lot. Once again, thanks for tuning in to Squares into the Plums, and see you next time.